When you work with modern APIs, you hear the advice, just use OAuth and JWT so often it starts to sound like a magic spell. Then you sit down with real systems and find a maze of token types, misaligned settings, and 401 errors that only show up when users are frustrated and deadlines are tight. This narration is part of the Tuesday Insights feature from Bare Metal Cyber Magazine, and it is all about making that maze easier to navigate. We are going to slow the topic down, strip away vendor gloss, and build a mental model you can actually use when you are staring at logs, dashboards, and broken calls.
At the center of this story are two pieces that often get lumped together. OAuth 2.0 is a framework for delegating access, so one system can issue access tokens that another system trusts. JSON Web Tokens, JWT, are a popular format for those tokens, a compact, signed set of claims that travels with each request. OAuth 2.0 focuses on how a client gets a token and how the roles relate to each other. A JWT focuses on how that token is packaged so the API can read it and decide what to do. When you line them up this way, you can already see that they live in the identity and authorization layer that wraps around your APIs.
It helps to be clear about what these pieces are not. OAuth 2.0 is not a login screen by itself. It usually works with an identity provider that handles passwords, multi-factor prompts, or device checks. A JWT is not encryption. By default, it is signed for integrity, but not hidden from view. Anyone who can see the token can usually read its claims. And neither of them replaces basic controls like strong network boundaries, mutual TLS between services, or traditional API keys where they still make sense. Instead, they give you a shared language for describing who is allowed to do what and for carrying that decision into each request. To see where everything sits, picture a simple architecture. You have an authorization server, sometimes part of your identity provider, that issues tokens. You have client applications, which might be web apps, mobile apps, or machine clients, that ask for those tokens. You have APIs, or an API gateway, that receive tokens and validate them. OAuth 2.0 describes the flows between these roles, how a client proves who it is, how a user approves access, and how the token is delivered. The JWT is what the client presents on each call, usually in the authorization header as a bearer token, and what the API or gateway inspects before it does any work. In a typical flow, a client starts by asking the authorization server for an access token using a grant that matches its style. A single-page app might use one pattern, a backend service might use another. The authorization server authenticates the user or machine, checks policy, and issues an access token, often in JWT form. The client then attaches that token to each call into your APIs. On the other side, the API or gateway validates the token's signature using a trusted key, checks that the token has not expired, and confirms that it was issued for this specific API or audience. Only when those checks pass does it move on to business logic.
Imagine a small online store to make this concrete. A customer signs in through your identity provider, which runs an OAuth 2.0 flow and ends by handing the front end an access token. When the store app calls the Get My Orders endpoint, it sends that token with the request. The API gateway receives the call, validates the JWT signature against its key set, verifies that the token includes a scope like orders-read, and that the audience matches the orders API. If everything lines up, the call is forwarded to the orders service. If not, the gateway returns a clear error and logs why. You might also issue a refresh token behind the scenes so the app can quietly get new access tokens when the old ones expire. Day to day, teams use OAuth 2.0 and JWT first at the external edge of their systems. They protect public APIs behind an API gateway that only allows calls with valid tokens from a trusted authorization server. This is a quick win when you are moving away from static API keys that never expire and are copied into scripts and wikis. By pushing token validation into the gateway, you keep individual services simpler and get a central place to enforce basic requirements like signature checks and issuer validation. It is a straightforward step that still makes a real difference in how predictable your security posture feels.
As environments get more complex, many organizations extend token use inside the perimeter. Internal services start calling each other with tokens that represent the original user or a service identity, rather than blindly trusting traffic from inside the network. Backend services inspect scopes or roles in the JWT to decide what operations are allowed. That supports patterns like only services with this client role can call payment APIs, or this user can only see orders from their own tenant. It also gives you more consistent audit trails because you can tie actions back to token claims and authorization server logs instead of relying on custom headers sprinkled through the code. There are good reasons so many teams put up with the extra concepts that come with OAuth 2.0 and JWT. A big one is standardization. You are no longer inventing your own token shape and your own way of passing it to the API. You are using patterns that gateways, libraries, and partners already understand. That makes it easier to onboard new services and external clients because you can point them to a well-known flow and a familiar token format. Another benefit is performance and resilience. Because a JWT can be validated locally with a public key, your APIs do not need to call back to a central session store on every request. The trade-offs are very real, though, and they are where many real-world pitfalls show up. OAuth 2.0 comes with new ideas like grants, flows, scopes, audiences, and client types that people need to learn and document. JWT brings key management issues, especially around how you store private keys, how often you rotate them, and how clients discover new public keys. Revoking access can also get tricky. A signed token that has not yet expired will usually keep working unless you have built a separate revocation or introspection path. If you treat these pieces like simple checkboxes, they tend to bite you later. Common failure modes have a familiar look. Some teams issue long-lived access tokens and never rotate keys, which turns each token into a near-permanent API key. Others validate only the token's signature, but forget to check the issuer, audience, or expiration, so tokens meant for one service can be replayed against another. A frequent mistake is stuffing too much sensitive information into JWT claims and then logging tokens everywhere. Because the token is not encrypted by default, that information can leak into log aggregation systems, debugging tools, or error messages, and quietly increase your exposure. Another recurring pitfall is confusing identity tokens with access tokens. An identity token from a login flow might look convenient to pass to an API, but it often lacks the right audience and scope claims for that use. It may work in small tests and then fail in subtle ways as the system evolves. Teams also get into trouble when they only protect the first hop. The front-end to gateway path uses tokens, but internal services trust any call that comes from the gateway, even if it is acting on behalf of different users or tenants. That undermines the whole reason for carrying structured claims through the system. Healthy API authentication with OAuth 2.0 and JWT feels different in daily operations. You see clear documentation about which flows each client type is allowed to use and what scopes mean across the environment. Tokens are deliberately short-lived, with refresh mechanisms where needed, and keys are rotated on a known schedule with a tested process. APIs and gateways consistently validate signature, issuer, audience, and expiration, and they log failures with enough detail to debug without exposing secrets. When something goes wrong, people know where to look. Token claims, gateway logs, and authorization server decisions all tell a coherent story.
At its heart, API authentication with OAuth 2.0 and JWT is about separating the question, who can do what, from the APIs that carry out the work, then expressing that decision through tokens every service understands the same way. Once you see it as an identity and authorization layer wrapped around your APIs, the technology starts to feel less like magic and more like a careful contract between clients, authorization servers, gateways, and back-end services. With a solid mental model, you are better equipped to challenge shortcuts, guide designs, and make sense of those late-night incidents where tokens seem to behave strangely. As you look at your own environment, ask how your token story hangs together and where a clearer, more deliberate use of OAuth 2.0 and JWT could make things calmer for both your users and your team.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.